folks, Robert O'Brien from O'Brien Guitars and the Luther Academy. The fine folks at GluBoost have come out with a new product, and they've sent me a sample. Lac R Shot, gun-like spray lacquer, cold checking formula. What this is, it's basically a spray gun in a can. So you don't have to go out and buy all the arsenal of spray equipment and stuff. Here it is right here in a rattle can. And it has the added benefit of imitating vintage lacquer finishes. In other words, it checks. In other words, it cracks. So if you're doing spot repairs or if you just want that vintage look, then apparently this is the product. I'm going to do some sample boards and see if that is indeed the case. GluBoost Rivals Spray Gun Lacquer with our adjustable vertical horizontal spray nozzle and turned balanced even flow formula. Lac R Shot is not just another pretty can. Lac R Shot is your perfect lacquer go-to and guarantees the absolute best-in-class lacquer finish you have ever seen from a little rattler. Enjoy all this, plus on-the-spot finish checking with our unique Lac R Shot cold checking formula. Lac R Shot, as close to a spray booth as you can get without the artillery. Well, let's put it through some paces. Let's see what it'll do. First thing I'm going to do is prepare a couple of sample boards. When I do sample boards and test products, I like to do one dark porous wood. In this case, I'm going to be using Wenge because it has a lot of pores in it. I really want to fill those pores and see what this is going to do. I'm also going to use a light colored wood, in my case spruce, which is equivalent to what you would see on a majority of guitars today, spruce. So here we go. For my first sample board, I'm going to use a piece of Wenge. I've chosen it because it's highly, highly porous. I want to see what this product's going to do. To fill the pores, I'm going to use the GluBoost Fill and Finish Blue Label. Just put it on your project and then use a promotional credit card or some type of plastic squeegee to spread it around, making sure that you go get it down into the pores. I'm mashing it down in, working across the green as I go. Once you have it all spread, then I'm going to use the GluBoost accelerator to accelerate it. I like to scuff it with some 220 grit paper and then apply a second coat. Make sure you vacuum all the dust off of there. You want the dust out of the pores, that way the pore filler will go into the pores. And then I apply a second coat of the GluBoost Fill and Finish Blue Label. Doesn't take very much. And it's going to kick a little bit quicker because of that accelerant that I put on there on that last coat. So you got to work fairly quickly. You can also just work in small areas. If you're working, for example, on the back of a guitar, you want to work in a little smaller area so it doesn't set up on you before you get it all spread. At the very least, you want to work in a well-ventilated area as you use this, and you may even want to wear a respirator. And then once again, I'm going to hit it with the GluBoost accelerator to cure it very quickly. Before I apply any finish, I like to get all of the pore filler back off the wood except for the low areas, except for in the pores. So if you're one of those people that didn't squeegee it off very much, shame on you. You just created a lot of work for yourself. If you did that, take a razor blade and just knock it down. I then like to come in with my palm sander and 320 grit paper and sand it all the way back to bare wood. There should be no shiny spots when you're done. And then I finish with a sanding pad and some sandpaper with the grain to remove any sanding marks left from the sander. When you get done, you should have a board that has no dark areas on it. For example, if you had a little dark area here or here or here, that means you didn't get all your pore filler off. So make sure you sand it back so it's uniformly the same color. Hold it up to the light Eyeball it, make sure you have no low spots. You should have no shiny spots at this point. You're now ready for your top coat of choice. So yesterday I put on 3 heavy coats of the Lacquer Shot, and this stuff sprays really well right out of the can. I mean, there is no orange peel or anything on there. There's my porous sample board. Here's my piece of spruce. Now my sample board started from raw wood, so I'm going to build some more so that I can level and buff this to a high gloss, especially on this piece. The spruce I could probably do right now. There's a pretty high solid content in this Lacquer Shot. If you're doing spot repairs on an instrument, a vintage instrument, then probably just a coat or 2 would be sufficient. I'm going to go ahead and spray some more coats today so I can get a little bit thicker build on it and then level it and buff it to a high gloss. Now the instructions say to sand between coats with 400 grit. I did not do that since I'm in the build stage. I put on the 3 heavy coats yesterday. This morning I'm going to level and I'm going to spray a few more coats. It says to sand between coats with 400. I'm going to use 320 grit. I have no goobers on my sandpaper. The technical term is kernel. I like to use the colloquial term goobers. If you have goobers on your sandpaper, then this isn't cured enough to sand. I sprayed this just yesterday afternoon, and it's already ready to sand. So I just got done sanding with 320. Still got a few shiny spots here. I need a little bit more leveling, but for a vintage finish, this is perfect already. I don't think you would even need to spray any more coats. However, since I'm going to build it, I'm going to spray some more. So here we are back after our second day of spraying. On day 1, I sprayed 3 or 4 coats. Day 2, I also sprayed 3 or 4 coats, about a half hour to 45 minutes, maybe an hour apart. I also sprayed them pretty heavy because I was trying to get some build on my sample boards. At the end of day 2, I noticed that the finish is already beginning to check. You can see little spiderweb cracking already happening. Now, I'm sure that's probably due to the fact that I sprayed it on pretty heavily. The spruce sample board is also beginning to check. It's a little harder to see because it's a lighter colored wood, but it's also beginning to check. Now, I was going to level and buff these to a high gloss. However, I don't think you need to. Right out of the can, this is a pretty good finish. Nice and level, glossy, and with the checking, it's already starting to rival a relic or a vintage type finish. So I'm not sure that you would need to even level and buff this. However, I'm going to do it just to see what will happen. Now keep in mind, this has been less than 24 hours since I sprayed my final coats. So it might be pushing the envelope just a little bit as far as the cure time, but I'm going to give it a shot and see if it will handle it. What I'm going to use is the 3M dry paper, and I'm going to start at piece 600. And let's see if this will take it. It is powdering up nicely, and it's not gumming up my sanding block. Now with the powder on there, you can probably see the checking just a little bit better. You see in this area here, it's also starting to check. It's supposed to take up to 4 weeks to do that, but I'm sure that that's because I sprayed it pretty heavy. Your lighter coats, which I did on my spruce board, are not checking quite as much. However, they are starting to check. So I'm going to sand this all the way up to about 3,000, then I'm going to hit it with my buffing wheel and see if it'll take it. Pretty impressed so far, though. No kernels or what I call goobers on the pad. powdering up nicely, which means it's cured. And it's been less than 24 hours, probably closer to about 15 or 16 since I sprayed my final coats. Here's my sample board sanded to 3000. I'm going to wipe it down with some naphtha. And for a satin finish, this is perfect. And it's already starting to check. If you wanted to put it on the buffing wheel, you can, and I believe I will. My spruce sample board, I'm going to buff it without leveling it because it went on really nice just right out of the spray can. So let's buff both of these to a high gloss and see what we get. There's the satin one. Got a bunch of checking coming on here. And if I leave it, I'm sure the whole thing would check. You can also speed it up by putting it in the freezer, which we'll try here in a little bit. But right now, let's just buff it to a high gloss. So here's my sample boards right after buffing. And remember, I did not level this before putting it on the buffing wheel. And that came out really nice. It's already starting to check. That would be a really nice vintage type finish. The Wenge sample board, also very high gloss. Starting to check in these areas here. So yeah, I think this is a winner of a product. Now, just to speed the checking process up a little bit, the instructions say you can put it in the freezer for up to 4 hours. I don't ever see myself putting a guitar in the freezer unless it's a solid body guitar. But I'm going to put these in the freezer for a couple hours and then hit it with a hairdryer and see if we can really get it to check. So here's my Wenge sample board that I've been working on. I just pulled it out of the freezer. It's been in there for a couple hours. I'm going to hit it with a little bit of hot air from the heat gun and see if it cracks. And look at that, it did check, just like it said it would in the instructions. And here's my spruce sample board. I'm going to do the same thing, just pulled it right out of the freezer. We're going to hit it with some hot air. My spruce sample board, it did check. I found it to be a little bit less than the darker wood, but it does have some checking going on here. It's a little harder to see because it's lighter colored wood. But the whole piece is checking, and it started doing that before I did the freezer and the hot gun trick. So it may check a little bit more over time. Definitely some checking going on there though. To enhance the checking effect on lighter colored woods, you can take a water-based dye, I'm just using a light brown color here, and wipe it across the top of the surface. And then wipe off the excess. Well, folks, this concludes my testing of the GluBoost Lac R Shot. Very impressed with this, actually. I don't know if I'd use it on a complete brand new guitar, but for doing spot repairs, fantastic. I didn't notice much of a difference with the freezer trick, and I think that also opens up a can of worms if you're trying to put a guitar in a freezer. I think I would just be patient and let the time do the checking. It says it will do it in up to 4 weeks. I found it did it within 24 hours of the final spraying. So fantastic product, and it dries so quick. Also, it sprays really nice right out of the can. So I think GluBoost has another winner product on their hands.